Section 17, Investigative Report and Conciliation. Arizona Fair Housing 101. The investigation is complete, now what? A few days later, Sarah stopped by David's office with another question. I understand how a fair housing complaint is filed, she said. I understand how investigators gather information. But what happens after the investigation is finished? David smiled. That's where many people think the case automatically goes to court. Sarah nodded. Doesn't it? Not necessarily. He pulled another file from his desk. Let's look at what happens next. The investigative report. David explained that once investigators have gathered documents, interviewed witnesses, and reviewed the evidence, they prepare an investigative report. The report summarizes the information collected during the investigation and helps determine whether there is reasonable cause to believe a violation of the Fair Housing Act has occurred or is about to occur. It isn't about proving someone guilty, David explained. It's about determining whether enough evidence exists to move the case forward. Sarah nodded. So the investigation is really a fact-finding process. Exactly. The facts determine the next step. An opportunity to resolve the dispute before formal enforcement proceedings begin. Federal law encourages the parties to attempt to resolve the dispute through conciliation whenever practical. Sarah smiled. We talked about conciliation earlier. We did, David replied. But now you're seeing where it fits into the process. Conciliation allows the complainant and the respondent to work together to reach a voluntary agreement before additional legal action becomes necessary. Rather than focusing on winning or losing, the goal is to resolve the dispute fairly and prevent future problems. If both parties are willing to work together, David explained, conciliation can save everyone time, expense, and stress. What is a conciliation agreement? Sarah asked, so what happens if they reach an agreement? David explained that the parties may enter into a written conciliation agreement that outlines how the dispute will be resolved. Depending on the circumstances, the agreement may include corrective actions, policy changes, training requirements, or other terms acceptable to the parties and approved by the appropriate agency. The goal, David explained, is not simply to settle the complaint. It's also to encourage future compliance. When no agreement is reached, Sarah looked thoughtful. What if the parties can't agree? David nodded. That happens too. If conciliation is unsuccessful, investigators complete their review and determine whether there is reasonable cause to believe that unlawful housing discrimination occurred. If reasonable cause is found, the appropriate enforcement process may continue. If investigators determine that there is no reasonable cause, the complaint may be dismissed. So every complaint doesn't end the same way. Exactly. Each case depends on its own facts. Truth matters. David became more serious. One of the biggest mistakes people make during an investigation is thinking they can fix the facts. Sarah raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Changing emails, altering documents, deleting text messages, creating notes after the complaint is filed. He shook his head. Those actions often create much bigger problems than the original complaint. Federal law expects individuals participating in fair housing investigations to provide truthful information and authentic records. Providing false information or intentionally altering evidence can create serious legal consequences beyond the fair housing complaint itself. The best approach, David explained, is complete honesty. If you made a mistake, address it honestly. If you followed the law, let your documentation speak for itself. Professionalism throughout the process. Sarah closed her notebook. I've noticed something. David smiled. What now? Everything comes back to professionalism. David nodded. It does. Professional communication, professional documentation, professional advertising, professional record keeping. The more professionally you conduct your business every day, the easier it becomes to respond if your actions are ever questioned. Sarah stood up. I hope I never need to go through this process. David smiled. Neither do I. But understanding the process makes you a better broker, and better brokers create fewer fair housing complaints. Arizona broker tip. Most fair housing complaints are not caused by intentional discrimination. They often result from inconsistent business practices, poor communication, or inadequate documentation. Establish consistent office procedures, document your transactions thoroughly, and address concerns early. Good business practices remain your strongest fair housing risk management tool. Online discussion question 1. Why does the fair housing process encourage conciliation before formal enforcement proceedings? Answer. Conciliation provides an opportunity for the parties to voluntarily resolve disputes, correct misunderstandings, and promote future compliance without immediately proceeding to more formal legal action. Question 2. What is the purpose of an investigative report during a fair housing investigation? Answer. The The investigative report summarizes the evidence collected during the investigation and helps determine whether there is reasonable cause to believe a fair housing violation occurred. Question 3. Why is preserving accurate records so important during a fair housing investigation? Answer. Accurate records help establish the facts of the transaction, demonstrate consistent business practices, and support truthful responses during the investigation. Altering or destroying records can create significant legal and ethical problems.